Working on old pianos, eventually you're going to come across hardware that's stripped, screws that are stripped out in the wood. Oftentimes toothpicks or wood splinters are stuffed in the holes, so temporarily the screws will hold. This leg has no other hardware except the screws to hold the leg in place, so most definitely we're going to need to repair these screw holes. So let's begin by making a jig. A jig is a dance, and it's also a tool that you'll make to hold tools and parts in place when you're assembling something. So we're going to make a jig to drill the holes for our piano leg repair. I want these holes to be pretty close to an exact position. After all, we are building a piano. So I'm using the original leg and bolts to mark my holes. As soon as the drill bit pokes through the other side, I can come over here and cut the hole from finish the hole from that side to have a very sharp edge. I'm using a brad point drill bit. I'm just going to use a couple of 1-inch wood screws to hold my jig in place. Now the idea here is that I want to drill out the wobbled out elongated holes. So I'm going to hold my jig up and eyeball, make a compromise to attach my jig so that I'm going to remove almost all of the material, all of the old hole on all 4 of these together, and then attach my jig in that position to the bottom of the piano. Next, we're going to determine how deep to make the holes. Be sure that the hardware that you're using in your legs does not protrude all the way through the key bed such that it would drill into the action. You don't want that to happen. Make sure that the screw depth does not exceed the thickness of the key bed, or you will not be able to get the action out. Best practice would be not to do this with the action in the piano. So the depth of this screw inserted completely into the leg is 1 inch. So that's the depth I'm going to make my hole. A real simple way to set the depth of your drilling is to mark your drill bit with a piece of painter's tape. So that's how deep I want it to go. Just like so. Now let's check out our new holes. Oh my, now how's a screw going to fit into that? Uh-oh. Before I glue the dowel into the hole, I'm just going to chamfer the end so it fits in easier. I'll just take my hammer and tap in a little bit. And then finally I'm going to take my flush cutting saw. It's a flexible saw with absolutely no offset of the teeth so that it just cuts flush. Teeth are razor sharp, so it cuts very quickly also. Perfect. And then I'll go ahead and make my next chamfer. Don't be concerned about having enough glue in the hole. Too much glue would create a hydraulic lock and keep you from getting your dowel seated all the way in the hole, and could potentially seep into places you don't want it to be. If you have any question that your flush cut is not quite flush, just take some sandpaper and just sand your dowel perfectly flush. If you really felt it necessary, you could use some wood putty, but when you're sanding these, actually you still have some wet glue around the corner, and your sanding, the dust from your sanding will fill in with the glue and make a natural wood filler of its own. The final step of the repair is to re-drill our holes. And I'll hold the leg in place and then put my hardware in. I screw just exactly where I want it to be. Give it a little tap. You may also get a pencil in there and mark your holes. Keep your pencil as straight as possible. Put a little dimple where you're going to drill. Keep your drill from wandering out of position. Now your holes may not be in the center of your dowels, because remember, the holes were elongated. Okay, we're almost finished, but what we need to do now is drill pilot holes, because if I screw this big fat screw, if I were even able to do it with all of my strength, probably not, this screw would act like a wedge and split my hardwood dowel open. We need to remove material by drilling a pilot hole. So I'm going to take my caliper and measure the shank of the screw inside of the threads. In between the threads, I'm going to measure the thickness of the screw shank, and I've got 0.225 inches. And so I selected a drill bit that matches that. This one is just a couple of hundredths larger, but no problem. The threads still have, it will remove the material from the shank of the screw and still allow the threads to cut into the wall, which is what we want. In this case, we only want to drill 1 inch into the material. No more. Okay, and finally we'll see how our new screws fit. Even though I drilled out with a pilot hole, these screws are still very difficult to put in by hand. Tighten these in as the threads are cutting into hardwood. You need to make sure it's perfectly tight. Just like new. Very solid.